In 1933, America was in crisis. The Great Depression had left millions unemployed, homeless, and uncertain about the future. In this storm stepped Franklin D. Roosevelt, a president who promised a New Deal for the American people. But as FDR expanded the role of the federal government in many ways never seen before, people began to wonder, was he saving the ideals of the Declaration of Independence or redefining them entirely? This video explores how FDR's presidency aligns and at times challenges the Declaration's vision of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
In 1932, the year Franklin Roosevelt was elected President of the United States, and 1932 was a year of tremendous crisis for the nation and the world. The country was in the third year of the Great Depression. In 1929, when the Depression began, unemployment in the United States was at 3.2%. By the time Roosevelt's running for president in the fall of 1932, it's almost 25%. So the context of the election in 32 was of a nation really in a state of disarray and a state of fear.
In fact, the most important elements of the New Deal were not about spending money directly at all, but rather about instituting new kinds of regulations to try to direct the course of the economy in 1933. The New Deal didn't become a kind of Keynesian operation until much later, in around 1938.
So as far as regulations are concerned, could you give our folks examples of that?
Yeah, well, the most important, and I think by consensus the most successful things that the New Deal did right away were to, first of all, shut down and audit the American banks and to permit to reopen only those it had determined to be solvent, and thus putting the federal government's seal of approval on the American banking system, which halted the downward spiral and the panics on the banks.
The Declaration of Independence outlined three core ideals. One, that all people have unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Two, the government derived their power from the consent of the governed. And three, that the government must remain limited, protecting freedom rather than controlling it. Supporters of FDR argue that his presidency fulfilled these principles by creating jobs, stabilizing the economy, and introducing social safety nets like Social Security. FDR sought to secure life and happiness for millions who had lost both. His later call for a second Bill of Rights, including the right to a job, housing, and healthcare. He reimagined liberty not as freedom from government, but as freedom through security. However, critics say this approach contradicts Jefferson's view of limited government. By concentrating power in Washington and expanding executive authority, FDR blurred the lines between democracy and government overreach. Some saw his four-year presidency as a warning that even well-intentioned leaders can drift towards tyranny. So was FDR a guardian of American ideals or a reformer who bent them to fit a new age?
Was this idea of like the second Bill of Rights, which was essentially that every American had the right to the American dream, basically, and that they had the right to be able to afford housing and to be able to have a job, be working, have employment, and basically like have financial security. So how do you think that this compares to the Declaration's understanding of natural rights?
So natural rights came from Blackstone, came from Edmund Russell Kirk wrote a lot about natural rights, and it's where it's called out in the Declaration that the rights we have are not granted to us by government, but they're protected by government. So FDR's second Bill of Rights was more about government granting us rights, not protecting rights, and that's where there's a basic difference between the two. And there's nothing wrong with saying that government should do that. It goes back to the question that you just asked. It's a difference between can or should. So the Declaration of Independence was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's things that people are born with, that government is there to protect, rather than government actually granting us things like housing or jobs or healthcare. So that's a shift that FDR took a lot of liberty in making. But it's not something that when you go back hundreds of years, multiple centuries, go back and look, FDR was really the first one in what you would say the modern era that was advocating for an expansion of rights on top of what the natural rights are that we receive from our Creator.
Right. Yeah. So how do you think Jefferson, being a proponent of limited government, as the author of the Declaration of Independence, would have responded to FDR's belief that the government should guarantee jobs, housing, and healthcare?
I think Jefferson would have been very uneasy with it. Because back then, he saw the government as a protector of freedom, not a provider of welfare. He would fear that if you had a dependence on the government, it would essentially be a new form of tyranny. Because if you rely on the government too much, and they disagree with you in some way, they take away what you depend on them for. So you kind of have, you would be almost essentially forced to agree with them, or else they'll take away your lifeline.
Right.
But President Jefferson, he also valued the well-being of the common man and believed that democracy is required an educated, self-reliant citizenry. So I think he would sympathize with FDR's compassion, but argued that the virtue and liberty are endangered when the states are to replace individual initiative.
Yeah, and do you think FDR redefined what the Declaration of Independence defined as the pursuit of happiness? Why or why not?
Yes, he did. Before FDR, the pursuit of happiness meant the freedom to pursue opportunity. After him, it increasingly meant freedom from deprivation. He reframed happiness as a collective social goal rather than an individual pursuit. This redefinition would reshape American politics for decades, influencing everything from social welfare policies to modern debates that we are having nowadays about healthcare and education.
So do you think that FDR's policies reflect or challenge the Declaration of Independence claim that the government derives its powers from the consent of the governed? Why or why not?
Certainly his policies, when he was first elected in 32, reflected the consent of the governed. He was elected in a landslide, overwhelming support for the federal government becoming engaged in solving the Great Depression. So I have to say that as far as the consent of the governed goes, his policies aligned with the consent of the governed in the New Deal.
Yeah. So how do you think Jefferson, being a proponent of limited government, as the author of the Declaration of Independence, would have responded to FDR's belief that the government should guarantee jobs, housing, and healthcare?
Jefferson would have been absolutely and 100% opposed to that, as would almost every single founding father. Even the Federalists would have opposed that. Alexander Hamilton would have had a hard time agreeing with that. You know, the founding fathers at the time were so anti-government that they consistently opposed the creation of a national bank. And so if they were that opposed to a national bank, I can't imagine they would have supported, healthcare and, capitalist and workers programs and things of that nature. I think they would have frowned severely on those.